Some sad news coming out of Atlanta, Georgia, or at least a suburb of Atlanta, I believe. Apalachee High School, a shooting. I don't know much about it. I was working all day yesterday when this happened. I heard about it. I had to pop in to see what news. I've got a couple different feeds here that I'm going to watch about this. And please, I want to hear your comments about this. This is the kind of thing we have got to find a way to end. And I've got my own opinions about it. I mean, I know I live here in Texas. We've had shootings and we've had terrible situations in schools, and everybody has an opinion about it. But in the mental health field, as a therapist, I've got direct opinions about this and feedback for number one, parents, number two, students, and number three, anybody else who is watching, because this is the kind of thing that just doesn't seem to go away. Let's find out more details without further ado. Student describes deadly Apalachee High School shooting.
Let me introduce you to Lila, who's 16 years old. She was actually in algebra class just this morning, elbow to elbow with that shooter, Colt Gray, as he's been named by the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. Lila, let me first start with, how are you? How are you coping?
I'm okay.
Number one, she's in class elbow to elbow with the guy that did the shooting. The PTSD in this, I can't even begin to start with. Like, it's just enormous, and they need EMDR immediately, today. They need to put them in some EMDR treatment just to desensitize them to the trauma. Otherwise, going back to school every day, you're wondering who you're elbow to elbow with. Secondly, I don't even know the details. Did this guy come in with weapons and just come into school? They have no metal detectors. They have nothing that can check any of the students for anything they have, just like we do when we go into concerts, all the time, and they just know whether people have something on them of substance like that. Secondly, the trauma this poor young lady has gone through, and to be able to talk about it, it's two-sided coin, right? Number one, you want the information, you want to hear the story, you want to hear what she went through. And secondly, I don't want her to talk because it's just drumming back up all of the trauma. And as a therapist, the one thing she needs to do is talk about it in a place where she can feel protected, secure, understood, heard, not grilled for information, and then also to be able to help her nervous system settle from this. Because just looking at her immediately, I'd say she's in shock. She's just kind of regurgitating what happened, and it's so fresh and so new, and look at everything behind you. So remember, there is trauma here. Remember anything that was there, and who anybody who's talking about it, there is trauma there. And if you look normal, it doesn't mean you are normal, because you could be in shock. And that whole fight, flight, or freeze response that comes with trauma, she's probably reliving it. I see her just gazing, and it's almost like she's reliving the moments as she tells them. And I'm telling you, EMDR is what they need to be able to desensitize the brain, settle the nervous system, and let them not feel so triggered every single time this comes back up.
Pushing through it, talking to friends, making sure, everyone else is okay, checking on people around me.
Can you bring me back? What happened?
I just remember, the moment that it happened, he was at the door, and I knew they were looking for him already, but he was at the door, and they almost let him in until they backed up, and then he turned away, and that's when you hear, the first rounds of fire.
So he was in class with you, in algebra class. He left. Then he came back, was at the door, and then knocking to be let back in. Why? You told me something about the doors.
Yeah, they lock automatically, so you have to be let in to come back into our classroom. So I think he wanted to come to us first.
Come to you first to shoot?
Yes, to shoot us class.
And then he was at the door, student went to open the door, and then what happened?
She backed away. I think she saw him, or maybe somebody said something, but I'm pretty sure she saw that he had a gun, and so she backed away.
So she was about to let him into the class, you think, to shoot the students, saw that he had a gun, did not let him in. What happened next?
He turns to the classroom to what would have been my right, and he just starts to shoot, and you hear
Oh man, so she knows this guy, obviously. She's elbow to elbow with him. Doesn't mean she's friends with him, but she obviously knows him because they're in class together, and she sees all this go down. You have to be sitting there what in the world just happened? because nobody goes to school just thinking about that and thinking that's going to happen at any point. And so smart of the teacher to notice or recognize, or somebody to recognize, wait a minute, don't let that happen. And I love how those doors automatically lock so that people can't get back in. I mean, it's beautiful. And secondly, that they noticed it and pull back. And I don't know what in the world everybody was thinking at that point. So he goes to another room. And I would hope in schools, mental health wise, that there would be some kind of intercom system where they could alert, set off an alarm, do something immediately to be able to say, here's this guy in the building, over the intercom, immediately, classrooms locked down, don't let anybody in, to at least isolate him into the hallway. But again, I'm going to tell you, if there is a police presence on campus, I don't know if there's a police, that would destroy my theory right here. If there's a police presence on campus active, you would not see this happen. I don't know how this weapon got on campus is my question. And secondly, because I live here in Texas, obviously, right? We have guns in Texas. We believe in, a lot of us do, in the right to be able to carry, but we also believe in protection. We have police officers on every campus of school, at least everywhere around me. You drive by, you see a police car out front almost all day. So you can see that the presence is there, which immediately stops anybody from thinking something like bringing this in. But how did this weapon get in is my question.
About 10 to 15 rounds back to back.
What did you hear?
She heard gunfire. What did you think
was going on in those moments?
As soon as they didn't let him in, you kind of I already kind of had a feeling it was going to happen and it was him. But as soon as they didn't let him in and you hear the gunshots, you kind of no.
Look at her, she's got that smile, but it's not a smile, She's reliving it. And that's why the lady put her hand on her arm, because it's traumatic. This is trauma, and you don't want to push this too far. You don't want to keep asking to where it brings up this trauma. She's trying to get details of it to find out, but And
you hear the gunshots.
Watch her arm.
You kind of no.
You knew that something very bad was happening next door. Did he ever say anything?
No, he never really talked. He was pretty quiet. He wasn't there most times. Either he just didn't come to school or he just would skip class. But even when he would have talked, it was one-word answers or just short statements.
You told me off camera you weren't surprised that he would be the shooter. Why is that?
Just because when you think of shooters and how they act or things that they do, it's usually the quiet kid or that's what stereotypes.
This is why we need to not stereotype and not target people, but we need to pay attention. We need a stronger counseling program in schools to support those counselors there, not just to be academic advisors, but to be people who are recognizing and in touch with the students, watching the students, walking around, seeing the students in halls, talking to teachers, being in touch with students to see, is there any concerns? Are there anybody that you would, and we can look and we can watch and we can talk to them. We can pull students like this in to see what's going on, because there is a way to prevent this. It's called mental health. The way to prevent it is not just to take away guns, because these guys are going to find a weapon wherever they need to find it if they want to. But we have to be able to look at the mental health and what's going on behind the scenes with these people. And I'll be curious. I don't know. This guy was captured, found, died. I don't know. But I would be so curious to see the background of people like this, to see if he has a history of mental illness.
Type for it to be, and he was the one that fit that description in our class.
Did you ever see the gun, or did the student that go to the door see the gun, describe it to you guys?
No, I haven't talked with her after this. It was all pretty hectic, but I didn't see the gun.
Did he ever have a hobby of guns, hunting? Did he ever talk about any of that?
No, he
never. I don't think she knew anything about him. He just didn't talk.
Can you tell me what it was like inside of the classroom when you hear those gunshots go off? How I heard that you helped to keep the other students calm, right?
Yeah, most of when we heard it, most people just dropped to the floor and kind of crawled in an area, piled on top of each other, lost a shoe when they were trying to get to a corner. The teacher turned off the lights, but we all just kind of piled together. And I pushed desks in front of us. I was just telling people oh, push desks in front of you.
Boy, she seems like somebody who jumps into action and takes care of business.
And are
Very
there any
composed.
metal detectors in the school?
No, not that I know of.
There
Did
we
you
go.
guys drill for active shooter?
Here we go. Okay, this is the thing. Metal detectors, just like concerts you go into, you walk through every single day. They're very simple. It's a very smooth process. We go to athletic events, to college or pro sporting events. Walk through a metal detector. It recognizes what you have. It'll beep. They will check you out. This can't be allowed.
Shooters, we know that some school districts do that.
They need to feel
They
safe.
were silent drills, so we stayed in our seats. The teachers kept teaching through them. I think it was more for like the system of it instead of like preparing us.
How quickly
Wow,
from the
she's
moment that you heard the
calling that
gunshots
out.
go off to the hard lockdown alert going on the screens, letting everyone else in the school know that something had gone wrong, how long did
Hopefully
that take?
less
Do you
than a minute.
recall?
Maybe a couple minutes, but it wasn't instant.
Needs
At
to
what
be
point
instant.
did you know that this was over?
When the cops came in the room and asked us to put our hands up, asked us if we had anything, a little bit after that they let us all out. But when it was kind of quiet, you hear like cops yelling, but it's kind of quiet. There's no more gunshots, things like that.
What was that communication like with your parents? I mean, all of us have phones nowadays. I spoke with many students texting what they thought might be their last words to their parents. What was that like for you?
I called my mom. I called her and I was like, oh, they're shooting up the school. She thought it was like, she didn't believe me at first, and I was like,
Oh,
no, they
my
actually
goodness.
are. And I talked to her for a second, and she was like, oh, I'm on my way right now. And then I was like, okay, I gotta go call other people. I text all my friends in the school, out of school, everywhere. And I'm just texting and calling kind of everybody.
And what was that like leaving the school? I saw videos.
It is very interesting how this generation of youth, that's what they go to, is immediately texting. I understand calling parents and saying, okay, this is what's happened. Come get me out of here. But then they start texting everybody and doing all of their texting, Snapchat, all kinds of things. When I want the focus for them to focus on the moment and the situation and what they can do to get out of here. Not so much trying to communicate, because when you're staring at a phone and you're trying to message everybody, you lose sight of what's going on around them. And there's a lot of schools, like in the district near us now, in high school, they have cubbies where the students have to put their phones in classes. They can't have their phones with them, which I appreciate because I think they need to be less distracted. But also in those moments, I understand people needing to call their parents and say something to them, but we've got to get you safe and we've got to get you out of this school. That's number one. We've got to have your attention and have you alert. But it is interesting how this generation really does tie to social media, and that's how they're all talking to each other immediately.
Of officers escorting the students with their hands raised. What was that like for you?
It was protocol, obviously, but I was glad it was over.
She's
like, I was glad we
so
were able
in
to
shock.
leave. I was looking
Oh
for my
my
friends
heavens.
that
Poor thing.
were there. I was comforting the ones that
Poor
had been
thing.
through a little bit of a harder time.
And then, Lila, what would you say to this student that you were just elbow to elbow with just this morning in algebra class, and now this?
I'm not sure. I want to know why he did it. I think that would be I want to know why.
Lila, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and the best to you and your family and your community. Thank you for talking to us.
Oh, Lila, she's smiling and it's just in shock. And poor thing, she's a protector. She's somebody who jumps in and takes care of business. She was moving chairs. She was talking to people, consoling people. But what about Lila? What about her feeling a safe opportunity to really let out what it was like in that moment, and not just to deny it and not just to push it aside and I'm okay, I'm fine, I move on? Because I'm telling you, there is trauma there that if that's not dealt with soon, it builds up over time and there are triggers. So when she sees people that are like this guy, when she hears a voice that is like this guy's, when she hears a sound that is like the door, those are the things in the future. It can be even years down the road. You can be re-triggered back to this very moment when you were trapped in that classroom and scared to death. And she's going to, people don't get help like this through situations like this, can end up 5 years down the road in a trauma situation wondering, why did I freak out so much about that guy and his voice or that situation and that person I saw and I felt really uncomfortable? Because your brain registered it as that old situation and you go back into it. That's why EMDR is so valuable. As a therapist, I'm telling you, the sooner they can get them, even in groups, even to get that entire class that was in that room in together and do some EMDR tapping, to be able to desensitize the brain and the nervous system would be helpful to them to be able to experience. What you do is you pair the memory of what went on now that you're in a safe place with bilateral stimulation. It allows the brain to desensitize, to not feel so triggered to it, because a lot of these children will probably not want to go, a lot of these students, children, these young men and women will not want to go to school. They will not want to be in that class, and they will be reminded of it everywhere they walk. So here we are at the start of the school year, right? And this happens. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to your children. Get help for them if they're seemingly just perfectly fine and they went through this. Get help for them if they're talking about it and they're feeling upset. And even Lila here just smiling. That doesn't mean everything's okay. Give me your comments. Let me know what you think about this. But this is pretty important. See you on the next Reaction Therapy.